Hello to everyone, and welcome to this very important panel on innovative approaches to ending FGM and different areas of approach, academia, policy, and advocacy. It is really shocking to see that more than 230 million girls and women alive today have been subjected to female genital mutilation. And this is an increase of 30 million or 15% compared with figures from 2016. And this is from the UN. And it's really a shocking revelation that though we've done so much advocacy and tried many different programs and best practices, that FGM continues. And we're now in March, and we will see in the summer several new dynamics that are happening with FGM. Some people send their girls back to the home country, maybe Pakistan, maybe in Africa, and the girls will just think it's a vacation, but it ends up with FGM. Other parents, possibly immigrants who've gone places like UK, and they pay for the excisors, the cutter women, to come to their country and to give FGM to the girls. That's now. We're in 2024. So we are continuing our advocacy against FGM, and we have some experts with us today who have looked at many different dimensions of FGM and will tell you what they feel are some of the best ways we can address this harmful traditional practice. We'll start with you, Toby, and I will then read from a UN document. Our first speaker is Dr. Toby Levine von Gleichen. She is an associate at the Hutchins Center of Harvard University. She is the CEO of Uncut Voices, and she is president of Forward for Women. She has lots of important activities in the women's rights movement. She's worked on FGM for years. And so, Toby, tell us your latest insights.
Thank you very much, Lois. I'd like to ask Sarah to turn my PowerPoint back to the first slide. Is that possible? I'm having considerable difficulty. Yeah, okay. I see what I'm supposed to be seeing. Thank you. I'm talking about Forward for Women's Mafieux project, Uncut Voices Publishing, and feminist synergies to end FGM. Next slide, please. My acknowledgements. For inspiration throughout many years of friendship, I'd first like to honor the late Effa Wadorkanu, OBE, the photo shot by my 8-year-old in London in the mid-1990s. That's why my head is cut off. Dr. Herta Haas, pioneer of the German women's movement to end FGM, and Dr. Mariam Racine So, director of Forward for Women today, who's quite alive. Mariam's picture, partner, needs no introduction, but of interest is the fact that here Dr. Angelika Merkel has just taught Mariam to take a selfie. Next slide, please. In the New Republic, Martha Nussbaum notes that academic feminism has been closely allied with the struggle to achieve justice and equality for women. But Nussbaum critiques a certain abandoning of clarity, divorcing thought from action. Not just fancy words on paper, feminist theory had felt itself obliged to serve in the real world. Thus, Nussbaum writes about the many concrete projects in which feminist scholars engaged. Next. They succeeded in legal reforms concerning rape law, domestic violence, sexual harassment, discrimination in the workplace, And Nussbaum continues, quote, improving women's economic opportunities, winning pregnancy benefits for female workers, campaigning against the trafficking of women and girls in prostitution, working for the social and political equality of lesbians and gay men, among other achievements. Next. Academics' point of honor is to be of a committed, practical sort. In her Atlantic article, Nussbaum regrets an academic turn symbolized by acolytes of Judith Butler toward an opaque academic discourse. The pragmatism needed to realize equality, empowerment, and freedom from damaging customs hides behind trendy tropes. If the personal is political, it is all the more so where the violation of girls' bodies is concerned. Next. Awa Thiam and Western academic discourse. In the admittedly controversial documentary and book on FGM from 1993 by Alice Walker and Pratibha Parmar, Warrior Marks, Awa prefaces filmed remarks by stating that she finds, quote, in some African intellectuals, men and women, an indescribable dishonesty. Next. And Thiam tells the camera, they have the tendency to say that struggling for women's rights is something specifically for Western civilization and has nothing to do with Africa, the real Africa, traditional and traditionalist Africa. I find this very wrong. Liberty concerns all of us. Fighting for universal rights is also a universal struggle. Next. A joint effort is needed to fracture patriarchy and its oppressive strategies, gender apartheid and sexism, without demonizing men. Fashioning my takeaway on the views of Thiam, Walker Parmar, and other African women activists and scholars, understanding and ending female genital mutilation requires a holistic vision. The brutal act in its expansive complexity and variations is embedded in a pervasive system of abuse. Next. FGM constitutes the most eloquent expression of oppression of women. Awa Thiam said that, and so did Pierre Faudès. Moreover, as keynote speaker at the 1983 annual meeting of Terre des Femmes in Frankfurt am Main, pictured left, Awa called for shared efforts to ensure women's human rights. Joining Awa in the photo are Ingrid Stehle and I, Awa's host. Stehle and Dr. Hertha Haas co-founded Terre des Femmes in 1981. It is Germany's oldest, largest, and staunchest guardian of women's increasing equality. Next. The Inter-African Committee invited Efewa Dorganu, OBE, and me to present our vision of mutual cooperation and support in 1997 at a meeting of the IAC. Here we are in Dakar, Senegal, talking about Terre des Femmes and Forward UK, founded by Efewa Dorganu in 1983. Next. Back in 1982, a conference agenda is already pursuing synergies to end abuse. Note the invitation. It may seem odd to seek insights from 4 decades ago when looking for innovative strategies against FGM, but learning from history shrinks error, among which I would count the silo ideology that minimizes commonalities. A 3-day conference chaired by Awa Thiam 42 years ago structured itself as such an exemplary boundary-crossing event. Next. The gamut of abuse. In the University of Dakar Aula, days 1 and 2 featured structural inequalities. For instance, the double standard on polygamy, not uniformly condemned but discussed as reformable. Moreover, near unanimous, attendees disapproved domestic violence, inequality in employment, land use and farming, boy preference, and inadequate schooling for girls. Roots of all these were revealed as anchored in the patriarchy. Next. Day 3, FGM, as activist intellectuals approached it in 1982 in Dakar. The entire 3rd day, having primed participants to perceive similarities, featured presentations, discussion, and a powerful film by Belgian Patricia Verhagen, Le Secret de leur Corps. One striking takeaway, Asitan Diallo from Mali shared her dissertation research. As you know, the cutting age has steadily fallen, retreat to the bush has shrunk, and Diallo found this even before 1982. Was this due to women's education, to incipient modernization, the relative advent of modernity? Next. Education means raising awareness locally and internationally, but medial choice counts. A second profound takeaway resonated after the ethnographic documentary of a licensed surgeon infibulating her daughter, filmed as if intended for an audience of medical interns in excruciating length and intimacy. Although FGM survivors don't mince words to paint their full landscape of terror and pain, sight is another messenger entirely. On learning that the footage was to be shown on German TV, the audience rebelled. In an Emma article with the quasi-untranslatable title Solidarische Rassistinnen, in solidarity yet racist, I conveyed the mood. You can't show that, the audience howled. They already find us barbaric. If they see such a sickening scene, even more will think that. Next. Offending footage excised. From Germany, only Dr. Dagmar Schultz and I attended the conference. It may have been Dagmar who warned the station. In any case, the infibulation close-up was expunged to sadly misleading effect. Anyone ignorant of what infibulation is would still not know after watching Verhegen's film on German TV. The maternal surgeon administers anesthesia, then cut, not the flesh, but the cutting of the flesh, and cut to girls' admittedly tear-stained but broadly smiling face filling the frame. What had happened in the interim? An audience is left unaware. Next. Adapting information to the audience. As the Dakar participants showed, with a few invited Europeans among Senegalese and attendees from neighboring states, the style in presenting FGM matters. As Forward for Women has written in its German articles of incorporation, efforts to end the right must adhere to anti-racist principles. Here we segue to the first of two relatively innovative approaches to raising awareness without vilifying either FGM practicing communities or individual survivors. Next. The first, sharing information via works of art. In 1998, Joy Keshi conceived of calling for paintings and sculpture dedicated to the theme of eradication. She thereby achieved several aims at once. Because men tend to know little about the subject, but most art students are male, Joy approached the Fine Arts Department of the University of Benin in Nigeria. Could she offer a workshop to students? Next. Nearly 90 works of art emerged in Lagos, first exhibited by the Goethe Institute in the fall of 1998. In November 1998, Joy brought 9 of these works to a Women in Africa and African Diaspora conference at the University of Indiana, Indianapolis, the gathering hosted by Dr. Obil Minameka, author, head of women's studies, and professor of French. There, only a few weeks before the official founding of Forward in Frankfurt, Toby met Joy. Can you bring these canvases to Germany? Thus, in early January 1999, Joy, with 24 oils and watercolors plus 2 marble sculptures, arrived. From 4 February 2000 to 26 February 2006, the traveling exhibition voyaged to more than 70 venues, always framed by a vernissage and finissage with attendees keen to ask questions and to learn. Often the press came too. And once a young man from Mali, wholly unaware of what happened to girls, fainted. Next. Why privilege art? After its successful stint in Germany with detours to Italy and Switzerland, the 2006 artwork went to the USA. Brandeis, Harvard, Bridgewater State University, Bucknell, Cornell, and Monmouth University displayed it before it returned to Europe, where it next appeared. In 2016, at the University of Oxford, Lady Margaret Hall. As Joy Keshi now Walker notes in the US catalog, quote, the arts can more easily conquer language barriers and appeal to diversity in Nigeria, a country of 120 million people back then, with over 250 languages. The media, moreover, has subliminal impact and can avoid giving offense when addressing a highly charged controversial issue. It can be a gentle yet forceful means of expression. Quote, painting, sculpture, prints, etchings, and photography can portray a broad spectrum of emotions associated with FGM, illustrating the variety of perspectives of victims, of bystanders, parents, and girls. It appeals to conscience and moves to action. Decision makers who visit exhibitions have the power to change their constituents' minds, end quote. I'm still quoting from the catalog. In 1998, after the exhibition traveled to a number of regions in Nigeria, 2 states abolished the practice, and today the Nigerian government is actively involved in stopping it. Next. Art is ennobling. Another reason to enlist art in campaigns to win people's minds lies in the respect it elicits from viewers for the creative hands that produce the artifact. If, as noted, countering racism is often required of campaigners, the coin of the art realm is dignity. It retrieves the girls scarred by the blades, offering them honor and distinction as survivors in a community blessed with talent. The photo right shows Heidi Bezas, formerly managing director of Forward in Germany, with joy at the Mannheim exhibition opening in 2000. Next. A second example of synergy, tackling FGM through holistic effort, Mafieux in Podor, Senegal. This 3-pronged project, orchestrated by Dr. Mariam Racine Sow, an educator and director of Forward for Women, combines attention to health, hygiene, and education. It takes place in the town where Mariam grew up, thereby honoring the idea of empowering grassroots activists. The ambulance donated on 10 December 2019 by the Frankfurt First Aid Squad is the centerpiece of maternal care. Next. Mafieux and Fulani means everything will be all right. Situated 400 kilometers from Dakar, Podor had suffered elevated rates of maternal mortality due to FGM and the inability of transport new mothers whose genital wounds impeded parturition. The donated ambulance in top condition has been transporting nearly 90 women each month to the nearest well-equipped clinic in Dakar, thereby saving lives. The educational component of Mafieux embraces the book feeding project. It supplies the new school being built as part of Mafieux with French language books. And to enable girls to come to school when they have their periods, an allied project, Menstru Talk, addresses and counters the absence of adequate porcelain facilities by raising funds for toilets. Next. Children in Podor enjoy their new school while showing the happiness we strive to enable by supporting the work of Forward for Women. Next. Final example, Uncut Voices, producing books to end FGM. When Kadi Kowita published Mutilé in 2005, 12 foreign language publishers scooped it up immediately. Which English language publisher had bought rights? I phoned XO Editions, the book's home in Paris. No one, I learned, was bringing it out in English, despite the high quality of discourse, drama, and engagement. I phoned every 6 months over the next 4 years. Once it became clear that no one planned to do it, I founded Uncut Voices Press. Next. 10 volumes have appeared, including memoirs, novels, poetry, drama, literary criticism, and the exceptional account by prize-winning novelist Hubert Prolongeau of Dr. Pierre Foldes's pioneering work. Left, you can see Comfort Momo MBE with Dr. Pierre Foldes and me in Dublin on 9 February 2024. And I want to offer special thanks to Kay Beth for designing the cover of Undoing FGM, as well as to Godfrey Williams Okorotis, whose paintings attract readers to several of our books. Next. Thus, to conclude, with a nod toward more exciting options, your interest in innovative approaches to ending FGM will be rewarded by a visit to the Global Media Campaign, run and conceived by Maggie O'Kane, and Integrate UK. I also recommend the Rutledge volume Left. So the link there will allow you to access the sources, access all of the paintings that I used in this presentation. And if you would like to host the exhibition, the paintings belong to Forward for Women. So simply contact Dr. Mariam Racine Sow, whose email address is there, or me. Next. Finally, in the photo left, you find 3 Uncut Voices authors. It was taken on 6 February 2023 after presentations in the European Parliament. Hosted by, on the left, Dr. Pierrette Herzberger Fofana, a member of the European Parliament, past president and co-founder of Forward in Germany. In the middle is Dr. Gladys Awo, managing director of Lesson in Hamburg and author of a study focused on changing attitudes of immigrants in Hamburg, which has come out in German but will be translated into English. And Dr. Toby Lem van Gleichen, me, co-founder of Forward in Germany and Uncut Voices Press. And thank you for your kind attention. The end.
Hello, Lois, you are muted.
Yeah. Thank you, Toby. That was a very fine presentation on the history and the evolution of FGM and efforts to eradicate it. Again, we find it really shocking that today, in these times, we're seeing an increase in FGM, which we thought never possible. But here are some of the forces that are causing the increase. Migration. In the West, there's FGM in the United States, often related to women who have migrated there. Then refugees. Let's look at the war in Ukraine and the flood of refugees that went to neighboring countries, and it still isn't resolved. And my children are half Ukrainian. And then we look at the Middle East, and is FGM happening there? They're just trying to survive with the lack of humanitarian aid in that war. And then also displacement within a country. Anytime you change your status, there's sometimes an effort to go back to traditional practices that hold the family together or the culture. Now I would like to tell you about a statement made by the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendes. This statement is so very significant because it links FGM to torture. And the Special Rapporteur came to the panel in Geneva that released this statement, and there were efforts, even standing outside the door, that we shouldn't read it. But we've got it, and we will continue to publicize this statement because it's very strong leverage in our advocacy against FGM. I'll just read a little bit of it. My predecessors have explored in length the extent to which the definition of torture can embrace a gender-sensitive approach, demonstrating that certain types of so-called traditional practices, such as FGM, whether inflicted by people acting in their official capacity or in a private capacity, might amount to torture or inhuman and degrading treatment. The purpose of my presentation is twofold: to reiterate that FGM in its form and cruelty amounts to torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment as set forth in UN articles, including the Convention Against Torture, and to emphasize states' obligations to exercise due diligence to prevent, investigate in accordance with national legislation, and punish this act of violence against women, whether perpetrated by the state or by private persons, and to provide redress, reparation, and rehabilitation to victims of torture and ill treatment. And at some point in this panel, we'll mention that there is surgery that some women are fortunate enough to have to rebuild the parts of their body that were cut. There also are efforts to have a medical FGM. And I hope that these experts will note that in their presentations. Okay, next we have Miss Hilary Barrage. She's a sociologist. She's an author and writer. She'll show us one of the books about gendered harm, FGM, and CEFM. She is an adjunct professor at the Buehler Center for Health Policy and Economics at Northwestern University. And we should also mention that Dr. Lori Host, also at Northwestern University, has done research in Africa, including on FGM. Okay, let's hear from you, Hilary.
Thank you.
Put yourself
Am I
on.
there? Am I on?
You are indeed, yes.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, since I've been asked to show you my books, this is one of them. And it's research in 5 continents, looking at 6 or 7 dozen different people, men and women, who have either campaigned against FGM or are lawyers or other people involved professionally, or have actually experienced it themselves. It's quite interesting because it certainly opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't know about how other people in other parts of the world do it. And then this is the textbook that I wrote, which is called A UK Perspective. It's actually global in its cover, but I really didn't want anybody to think I was telling people who are in communities where FGM actually happens that I'm telling them how to think about it. So it's my understanding of legal and all sorts of other things to do with that issue. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think what I'm going to say follows, I hope, nicely from what Toby and Lewis have said, because I'm an academic sociologist. I'm not a community activist as such, though I sometimes do it. But I look at patterns of behaviour, I look at data and social change, and especially around women in FGM, and I have done that for many years now. My agenda for us to follow is here. I will pick up for some of those issues and trying to explain them. But I wanted to be clear that what I'm saying is testing ideas. I'm not telling anybody how they have to see this. So I wanted to look at practical or policy measures which might help to stop FGM. We've done a lot of work, we being colleagues, on the ground in communities. We know a lot about what happens and what doesn't and does work there. But we have kind of ignored very largely the wider issues, as Lois said, for instance, that influence all women's lives. And I want to suggest that, in fact, one major way that we might be able to get FGM into history as soon as possible is to recognise ways that we can confer full independent adult status to women everywhere. Because women who are independent, economically independent, have status in their own rights, are far more likely to say, I don't want it, or I wish I hadn't had it. And also, my daughters will not have this. Whilst we are, as women, party to being junior partners with men, we don't necessarily have that choice. So I'm looking to ways that I believe, through wider policy and political movements, will enable women to be fully adult in the way that they are recognised by the people. So, and I've chosen a few. I don't know if we can move down a little on the screen. If we are at the bottom of the screen, yeah, you can see what I've chosen. At the bottom of the screen, I have chosen a number of issues which I think are worth looking at. And in support of those, I provided at the top of the screen, you don't need to look now, but the links to papers where I have given the references for most of this stuff. I won't give them now, but it's there. So communications, yeah. Everybody knows communications are important. And we know that to have mobiles, or what Americans call cell phones, we need power and we need internet connections. Solar power is often quite adequate for mobile phones. Internet connections are a basic infrastructure requirement for any modern society these days. These are things that men can fix without having to be asked. Right. And mobiles will deliver increased literacy. They can deliver education and training because COVID actually has produced so many distance learning packages now that they can be adapted to almost any requirement you have. They interestingly enable women to reach beyond their own particular customary boundaries of kinship and locality, which broadens their experience of other people. And that could, for instance, include the information that not everybody has FGM. And of course, they are vital for contact for medical and legal services and similar things like that. And they are used very effectively, for instance, by the global media campaign to end FGM, of which, by the way, I'm an honorary advisor. We know these things can work. There's just so much more potential than we've had already. Another thing about communications is bicycles, very obvious and simple. And as has been observed, rural mobility cuts across most sustainable development goals. Rural people need to be able to access schools, health clinics, work-related locations. The World Bicycle Relief, for instance, has provided 200,000 women in sub-Saharan Africa with sturdy bicycles to get around and to make contact with each other and to do their work. We also know about barefoot grannies, who are traditional community engaged matriarchs who provide health advice and similar, and even in some places technical advice like how setting up solar energy. The scope for bicycles, believe it or not, is huge and probably by no means yet met. And then we learned that in Uganda, there's a group called Male Champions, which use bikes, men, to combat FGM, teenage pregnancy and child marriages, going into communities and explaining why they don't condone that. If we look too at maps, which is another really important part of communications, obviously essential for locating disaster responses, delivering needed services. There's a humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, which is a global community of volunteers, often using mobile phones, which help to locate places that may not even have proper roads as yet. And there's something called Crowd to Map Tanzania, which uses mapping actually to alert and stop FGM. The scope of mapping is much, much more important than we probably recognise normally in our discussions about FGM. From maps, we move to land. Did you know that globally, Indigenous and local communities formally outright own just 10% of land? Just 10%. In 10 countries in Africa, 12% of women and 31% of men say that they own land individually. Still, much of the land is owned by no one. Women continue to be denied ownership of land. They often have no legal guardians. The land rights are held only by men. Rights are lost on divorce or death. Polygamy can make it very complicated. There's all kinds of reasons that suddenly the ladies can't have the land. That needs to be fixed by legislators, and it could be if they wanted to. Urban settings, when people transfer from rural to urban because of issues such as Lewis has mentioned, are even more confused. Tenured security is very doubtful. These changes don't necessarily make for progress. They can be retrospective and they can put you back to where you were before. We need to look at that because more and more people are moving into urban settings and they may not own anything when they do so. And then, for instance, we have in Mali, which is a country which still has very high incidence of FGM. It's said to be about 90%. It is said that paternal grandmothers demand FGM for their granddaughters as a way of making them marriageable, and that is a serious reason why they have to have FGM. But of course, that's because they're thinking about future pensions, their futures when they're elderly, who will look after them, and so forth. If women had rights to land, they could function economically without having to get married to somebody that they probably don't even want to get married to. They may or may not. I think that legal ownership of land over time could confer adult economically independent status to women And I think that is a very urgent thing to be addressed by men. We're not asking them to look at the gory aspects, the detailed, intimate aspects of FGM. We're asking them to face up to the fact that they are not helping by not delivering these things. And of course, some are. And then I wanted to take you on the subject of land, from ownership to trees and agriculture, and having the knowledge and resources to manage your land. The 2019 UN Women's Report said that women are not less efficient farmers than men. They simply have less time, resources, equipment, and are asked to do a lot more than the men in the time that they have. So they may well be even more efficient, we don't know, but they're not less efficient, they're just more stretched, which is the story, of course, of many women across the world. There have been projects such as She Grows in fact, Mali, which supported 1,000 women to grow trees, food, and thus gain income. This is really important because, again, anything that increases independence for women is likely to decrease the inclination to undergo FGM or to allow your children, your daughters, to undergo it. There is also the Great Green Wall, which is, as you will know, 8,000 kilometres of trees, vegetation, fertile land in the Sahel, which is increasing biodiversity, crops and jobs. This is not independent of what happens to women. This is fundamentally about what happens to women, because often they are the ones who are most struggling to produce income and food and the rest of it. So we have to ask, how can women be assured of the benefits of these developments? We need to think about the structures globally and nationally, which enable women to benefit as much as men from the developments that are occurring. Food, yeah, well, it would be possible if we wanted to feed the world as we are, which is relevant to my next topic. Consumption at the moment is unbalanced globally. The global North's consumption of water and land-intensive food is much higher than that of the global South, much higher. And the global North has, I think with some reason, been accused of being food imperialist. That's a difficult issue. We won't go into it here, but we have to think, are we demanding rights to food that mean that other people don't get food they need because we are asking for things that we really do not need ourselves? And support for women farmers would do much to rebalance that food production if we were enabling women everywhere to produce the food that they need to produce and to make an income from it and to act effectively as farmers. Then maybe that would be reduced. I'm deliberately talking about women who stay in their communities. Equally important, of course, is the women who move on to professional roles in cities and the rest of it via universities. But we know about that. I'm just saying, let's not forget, a lot of women want to stay, no doubt, like in any other part of the world where they are, but they want to be more effective and more comfortable in what they do. I think we could help a lot there. And related to that, because it is an important issue, is the issue of family size. It's separate but relevant to nutrition and health. Family planning is a very difficult thing to talk about, but probably about half of all pregnancies globally are unintended. I don't mean by that that babies aren't welcome, but they weren't invited. So your baby arrives and you're, of course, thrilled mostly to receive it, but you didn't intend it. A lot of men still will not discuss this issue. And some couples are not aware of effective ways to limit their family size, or they have no access to the means whereby they could. And one of the reasons that family size remains large is, as has been suggested, that there's a fear that children will die. And it's a very reasonable fear. And for instance, in Victorian England, a lot of children died. It's not just an issue elsewhere. And then if the children die, there will be no one to care for the parents in later life. This is a recurring theme. What about my social pension, the care I get when I'm older? We have to acknowledge that. Good medical care for mothers and babies, and knowledge of how to manage the number of children you have to the number you want, having, of course, persuaded your partner to discuss it, which might be difficult if you're in a polygamous situation, is essential. And followed from that, perhaps more directly relevant to what we're talking about today, is the issue of stunted children. I hesitate to use that term. It sounds horrible, but it is actually the WHO term for children who are 2 measures or more below the average height and functioning for their age. It's really, really important. Now, to answer the panelist's question here, it's on my website. You can find out all about me if you look on my website. Thank you. Overburdened mothers, however hard they try, are going to struggle to feed and care for a lot of children in some cases, such as we have said about the instances of farmers who don't have the rights to all the access that the men have. FGM is an additional risk, adding to that for mothers and children. We know also from other research that large families in stretched circumstances can be putting children at risk. Nobody wants to, it just is a fact that that can be so. Stunted children have disadvantages for their whole life. That doesn't help anybody. It's detrimental to families, communities, and even nations. Of course, all the children are here are welcome and should be cared for, but it is much in the interest of communities at large that as many children as possible are healthy, they live to adulthood, they're able to lead functional lives, and they can indeed look after their parents as their parents get older. So these things are very much related to FGM and how much a woman can be a farmer or whatever else she chooses to be, and how much she can have independence to decide autonomously what will happen to her own body. Water and climate change. You may or may not be aware that 1 in 3 people globally have no access to safe drinking water. That is water that is clean and accessible where they live. Half of people on this planet have no decent sanitation. That is horrendous, but it's true. Water is a huge burden on women. UNICEF reckons that women and girls spend, wait for this, 200 million hours every day collecting water, collecting women 200 million hours every day. It drastically diminishes the time available for school, for childcare, farming, and that. Remember that water collectors can be just 6 or 7 years old. Mostly that burden falls on females, not on males. It's unpaid, so it doesn't get accounted for as an aspect of domestic and care work. It isn't in the measured economy of a nation because women just do it. That's their job. It doesn't count. It jolly well should. These factors are ignored in almost all policy documentation. Where is it built into policy for a nation that some proportion of that 200 million hours every day is spent just collecting water? You can add to that rural households led by women in the areas that we are perhaps considering lose 8% more income to heat stress as climate change occurs than male ones do. 8% is a lot when you're on a very low income. Climate change is, of course, as Lewis has said, causing people to leave their communities as refugees, just trying to migrate to safer areas. We know that women and girl refugees, migrants, are exceptionally vulnerable to violence. We know that FGM may be seen as a measure to prevent rape, the idea being that you can sew your daughter up and she won't get raped, which is, of course, nonsense. It increases the risk of FGM. Again, this is climate change, and that's what happens, increases the risk. We are trying to account for the fact that there are more girls and women having FGM now than before. We have to think about things like climate change when we consider that. So it has been suggested by quite a lot of commentators that it's essential that we have gender disaggregated and FGM impacts in assessing and investing in water structure and so forth. And given that we know that only 0.5% of water on Earth is usable and available as fresh water, this is really, really important. Climate change has dangerously affected water security. Over the last 20 years, terrestrial water supply has dropped by 1 centimetre a year. So 20 centimetres. And that's very significant if you live in a place where there's not a lot of water. Water security obviously increases hygiene risks, especially for girls and women, and especially more so for those with FGM. But sometimes FGM is actually seen as more important where water is scarce. The argument being that FGM keeps you clean. Interestingly, however, in one small research project, which we need to visit, I think, in Kenya, 3 ethnic groups that live near water didn't practice FGM. The remaining 60 groups in the other drier parts of the Rift Valley do practice FGM. In other words, the availability of water is actually a reducing factor as far as we can see in FGM. We need to check that out further. And of course, underlying all this is the issue of hydrology. There are a lot of people who are experts in hydrology these days. Of course, most of them are men. And it's essential that they start to look at water supply as an issue for women as well as an engineering challenge. It can be done. It's time it was done. I move on now to the end of my talk, which is not actually that long. Possible impacts. How do they relate to what men everywhere can do to help eradicate FGM? These are all what I would call feasible, low-tech or practical interventions, which would benefit everybody, that don't only help women. They're all developments which men, male politicians, male policymakers can introduce without embarrassment, without having to talk too much about FGM. They don't have to link it directly to FGM, but they must be aware that that is part of the linkage. And I wonder, can impacts be positive in some of these places where women become more economically independent? Will that help them to be seen by others and by themselves as not requiring FGM, and certainly not requiring it for their daughters? Because we have to move, as well as working on the ground, to the actual wider context in which women and men operate. And there is a cultural shift required, which is even more than just saying this is dangerous. We have to make the case that actually it's not only dangerous, but it also is not necessary if women are economically and socially rather more dependent. So that's why the gender disaggregated impacts and tracking of changes in FGM are so important. I have suggested in a paper I wrote, actually, that there be an economic deficit index for FGM, which considers human capital, sustainable development and land. And I'll put that in my write-up of this paper. So these factors all impact on the aspects of lives and the status of women. It's very important that respect is shown by example to women and girls who seek status as economically independent adults. We need to try to make FGM status irrelevant, because that is the way that we can most probably get rid of it. And we have to uphold the dignity of women as citizens and adults, irrespective of their FGM status. CSW 68, which is what we're operating in now, seeks to accelerate the empowerment of women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutes and financing with a gender perspective. So that strengthening institutions, financing with a gender perspective is what I'm trying to talk about here. Many activists are working flat out in communities to eradicate FGM, but now we must consider the wider practical contexts. We need to accord women dignity, respect and worth regardless of their FGM status. And it's an attitude change which men must deliver into policy terms and demonstrate by personal example. That, I think, can be helped by enabling women to have much more independent economic independence. There is an urgent challenge to make FGM irrelevant in the contemporary world. So my question is, will enough men support and deliver with appropriate evaluations such developments to bring FGM to an end?
Thank you very much. Hillary, would you please put your presentation or what you can of it in the chat by a link or somehow, because we have a request from one of our attendees to have that. Would you please?
I think that probably Sarah's going to do that for me.
Okay.
Are you,
good.
Sarah? Are you there, Sarah?
Yes, I
We're
am
there.
doing it right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will write it up as the next post on my website, so
Okay.
that we can link it to other things. And some of the links are already there in the previous 2 post that I mentioned, so that you can look at the evidence for yourself, or for whoever wants to know it.
Thank you so much, Hillary, because again, you're opening a lens to areas of FGM that are not maybe publicized as often. You're taking a new window on the economics and the causal factors. There was a huge headline about FGM some years ago when a girl in Egypt died. When a girl dies, and this is happening in Africa as well, because of the procedure, she bled to death. And that can lead to legislation. But again, if a law is passed and it is not enforced, it's no more than a piece of paper. And that is one of the reasons that FGM still occurs in many places. I want to recognize Emma Bonino of Italy. I was living in Italy at that time, and Emma Bonino was a foreign minister for a while, and she was the catalyst to get an FGM resolution at the UN General Assembly. Again, it doesn't have enforcement capabilities, but it is an important tool to use in our advocacy. And I know that there have been some alternative procedures to FGM, like coming of age ceremony. And maybe later one of you can talk a little about that, because they haven't been really successful. And my last point is there are movies about FGM, documentaries, and it resonates in my mind, the little girl who thinks she's going to a birthday party. And she has women on both sides, her mother and her grandmother. And then they take her in a hut and the door closes. And then it's all over. And who pushed that to happen? That was grandma. So grandma can be a very definite force in convincing her daughters to have their daughters undergo FGM. Thank you, all of you, for these really fine and presentations, opening up new information, new questions, new realities about female genital mutilation. Our next speaker is Lorraine Coots-Farman. She's a solicitor, she's a lawyer, and she is speaking on gender and human rights. She is one of the leaders in advocacy against FGM, and she lives in Paris. Bonsoir.
Okay, bonjour. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased and honored to be here. And I imagine there are probably some familiar faces watching me. As we all know, FGM is practiced as tradition in 29 African nations, many of them distributed more or less across a zone running from Senegal in the west to the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa contains the regions Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Somalia. However, it is not uniquely confined to Africa. It has been practiced in the Middle East, Indonesia. It has been seen in 4 provinces in Iran and amongst certain communities around the world, including immigrant communities in Australia, Canada, the UK, and the United States. Now, due to civil wars that have caused major refugee movements from the Horn of Africa, it can be plausibly assumed that FGM is being performed in the refugee camps. There is no single explanation for the practice of FGM. However, there have been some explanations that have been put forward. The status of African women, the prevention of women wanting to engage in illicit sex, the high emphasis on the physical state of virginity, the economical consequences that await an unmutilated woman, and as a rite of passage, transitioning from childhood to womanhood. A rite of passage is any ritual that marks a transition from one state or status to another. It occurs simply when an individual leaves one group and goes into another. And naturally, it gives a sense of identity and a sense of belonging. I mean, all human beings experience these transitions as they're found in every known human society, past and present. Childhood slides into adulthood, and it is celebrated. I believe in the Hispanic culture, often a girl's 15th birthday is celebrated. In the Jewish religion, there's bar and bat mitzvah. In the United States, there's the sweet 16. Now, FGM is also often, but not universally, seen as an initiation rite, signifying the move from immaturity to maturity. And unlike many Western societies where the boundary between childhood and adulthood, sometimes it's not that crystal clear. Traditional African rites of passage mark an unambiguous transition with an associate change in status, roles, and responsibilities. FGM is often, but again, not always, embedded in rich ceremonies in which the girls are feted, showered with desirable presents. The families are honored. The mutilation ritual is rich in symbolism.
That's fine.
In the period preceding mutilation, girls are the focus of elaborate attention. The festivities can last for days. Girls wear their most beautiful clothes. They obtain blessings from their elders, receive important life lessons from their moms. Is also seen as a community celebration. You're being the center of attention, acceptance by the community, the applause of the villagers, the food, the feast. There are special songs and dances and chants that are intended to teach the girl the desirable characteristics of being a good wife and a good mother. So it's understandable that mesmerized by this celebratory atmosphere, girls grow up knowing that one day I will be initiated into society. However, although they may be giving only a few weeks or days notice or no notice at all, as many memoirs narrate a literal ambush arranged by their mother and the traditional cutters. It is the testimony from the women themselves that one is aware of FGM's brutal reality and hellish effects, even years after the procedure has taken place. One survivor said, why are we being told as girls when we get cut, we bring honor? This is not true. Some girls die. Our lives are just basically taken away from us. Another survivor said, what hurt me the most was the indifference of the people around me. 3 or 4 girls were sitting on the ground, their legs sprawled. They were screaming, and soon I was screaming. I was so afraid. And then, of course, is FGM's documented excruciating pain. One survivor said, no anesthesia, no disinfectant, no sterilized instruments. Even today, 31 years later, I and many girls who went through this horrible practice still suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma. In Hilary Barrage's book, Female Genital Mutilation, a survivor told her, "It's been 41 years, but the sound of the blade still rings in my head. The pain I felt was so intense that even today I can't describe it. Why did my mother do this to me?" And one survivor said, "I had no idea what was going to happen. I was thrown on the ground. They opened my legs. I will never forget the screaming. I could hear the shrieks. To this day, I can't forget this experience. It still hurts. The pain is still raw. I suffer in my daily life." The famous, she died, I believe, 2 years ago, the Egyptian writer and activist and physician, Nawa El Sadawi, and excuse me if I mispronounced her name, she said, "Since my childhood, the deep wound in my body never healed, but the deeper wound has been the one left in my spirit, in my soul. I can't forget that day in the summer of 1937, 56 years have gone by." The price females must pay in order to cross over from childhood to adulthood is at an extreme significant cost of psychological trauma and physical pain. My question is there an alternative? The first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, Wangari Maathai, she said, and I quote, "In constant flux, reformation, and adaptation, cultures evolve over time, consciously disregarding retrogressive traditions like FGM and embracing aspects that are good and useful. Africans especially should rediscover positive aspects of their culture." FGM can no longer remain immune to scrutiny because of this word culture. The mere happenstance that it is called culture does not mean it is absolute and untouchable, because couched in the name of culture, it carries on to thwart the evolutionary progress of the status of women. It ignores the developing human rights standards. It maintains power, repression, sexual control under the name of culture. It is a tragic, extreme example of the catastrophic abuse of women. And as a matter of urgency, it must be discarded. No matter how historically entrenched FGM is, bleeding genitals need not be part of a woman's identity and destiny. And so my question, is there an alternative? Culture change does not mean giving up what is good in ourselves. It means keeping what is best whilst accepting the fact that we need to grow. As with people, cultures are hybrid, they are complex, and in a process of constant transformation. It is possible for a culture to survive whilst discarding FGM. Change is not tantamount to culture betrayal. Change is not tantamount to destruction. Change in one custom can be compensated by an alternative. To fulfill this social gap in FGM African practicing communities, this campaign for the eradication of FGM must have an alternative focus for celebration in the communities, a ceremony where the cutter perhaps just touches the clitoris can be substituted. If anything, the significance would even be more significant. The Kenyan campaigner Nis Lenete has said, "All the other things, the blessings, putting on the traditional clothes, the dancing, all that's beautiful. But whatever is harmful, whatever brings pain, whatever takes away the dreams of our little girls, let's just do away with that. It is the cut that is wrong. Alternative rites of passage, known by the acronym ARP, and that's what I will call it, has been put forth by NGOs and international FGM eradication programs as an alternative to female initiation into womanhood, but without the mutilation. Now, this newly invented ritual aims to replicate or mimic certain aspects of the traditional initiation process, but without the mutilation. It has gained popularity. It has started to be included or incorporated into FGM programs or FGM anti-FGM programs. The popularity with ARP is that it promises to eradicate FGM, but it respects and promotes the culture. The first ARP was organized in Kenya in 1996 by the country's leading women's organization in collaboration with another organization. Now, the intention was to simulate the traditional ritual as closely as possible without actually mutilating the girls, to lead the community towards pursuing the ceremony, the passage from childhood to womanhood, but without FGM. Some 25 mother and daughter pairs participated in a 6-day training session that included information on the consequences of FGM, how to defend the decision not to undergo it. And then the session culminated in a coming of age celebration planned by the community, excluding FGM, but including gifts, special t-shirts, and books of wisdom prepared by the parents. And then it was concluded by a public declaration stating the communities have recognized the girls' passage from childhood to womanhood. The question is, does this work? Yes. The lack of community involvement, the lack of community inclusion in the training is going to bring distrust and will give the impression that here we go again. Someone, an outsider, is interfering into our community's affairs and culture. The main issue in the community's recognition of ARP, which is not always ensured, is that it has sometimes provoked a negative reaction as it has been perceived as condescending and derogatory. Change must come from within the community to be effective. In the words of one Somalia woman who was mutilated as a child, she said, if Somalia women change, it will be change done by us, amongst us. The advantages of ARP are numerous. It facilitates community ownership and support. It maintains key cultural practices. It does increase knowledge and empowerment of girls, and it does increase publicity about change in community celebration. But there is a problem here. This approach is only viable in communities where FGM is a rite of passage. In some communities, the initiation ritual does not end in a public community-wide ceremony. For example, amongst the Maasai, there has not traditionally been a public ceremony associated with FGM. The mutilation and transition ceremony is normally undertaken within the girl's family, where the parents will organize a feast at home with families, relatives, and neighbors. In other words, the FGM ceremony is a family affair. Thus, introducing a public ceremony when one never took place initially is going to cause a problem. ARP differs from one community to another. There's no single model applied to every NGO implementing them. If NGOs are the main leaders of ARP, there is going to be an absolute need to resort to local partners to assist them in involving the community members. This is absolutely tantamount. ARP programs must involve the whole community in the ceremony in order to build a social consensus around the rite and its significance. The elders, the parents, the mothers, and particularly the traditional cutters, who are highly respected, who are held in high esteem. They must be involved. Young girls then receive training, and the whole community is invited to the closing ceremony. ARP in isolation just won't work. About a fortnight ago, I had the occasion to talk to an incredible man from Kenya who was fighting FGM in his community. And I asked him about ARP because for me, initially at the beginning, I thought this is wonderful. And he said to me, you can't invite girls to an ARP workshop. But in 2 or 3 weeks later, those very same girls who attended the workshop, they have been mutilated. He said the community is changing tactics, changing devices and new ways. For example, mutilating the girls at night, and even changing the FGM type to a practice that heals faster. The World Health Organization has stated there is no single practice which has such a dramatic negative effect on health in the broadest sense than FGM. The health consequences of FGM have been, with surgical precision, extremely well documented, and needs no further comment from me. However, there's a little bit of a problem here. If you rely too much on the health consequences when you try to implement the ARP approach, this argument inadvertently could lead to acceptance of medicalization. Those who are advocating medicalization as a lesser evil, as an acceptable alternative, it is not, because at the end of the day, the girl is still mutilated. Those who are advocating that, they are effectively promoting a watered down version of FGM. This goes against WHO's statement, and it goes against the essence of February 6th, the International Day for Zero Tolerance for FGM. What has been noted, and many people have mentioned this in previous panels, is the trend that girls are becoming younger and younger and younger. So ARP is now further limited by this trend of mutilating girls at a younger age. This means this transition from childhood to womanhood may not exist in a very stark way. This means less ceremony, less ritual. In these sorts of situations, ARP with another approach will be needed, such as carrying out the program was adopting a non-judgmental human rights approach, similar to focusing too much on the health consequences that could inadvertently lead to, well, let's go to medicalization. Relying too heavily on the human rights approach can be difficult to articulate in cultures where rights are not strongly promoted, where women's rights are heavily subjugated, or where rights are a difficult concept to discuss in concrete terms. Nevertheless, it is essential in ARP programs that every effort must be made to ensure the human rights message. It is a delicate balancing act. Conducting community awareness raising of the harm of FGM, involving the entire community to make a public joint decision, and very importantly, to support this by spreading the news to neighboring communities. There must be a supportive environment that enables change. And yes, this does mean the government. In FGM practicing communities, there is this significance of FGM that goes far beyond the actual mutilation. When a girl has been subjected to FGM, she's now been pushed into another social structure. In most cases, there's going to be a discontinuation of school and education. And there is going to be, in most cases, the onset of ECM, early child marriage, when girls are just simply too young on every level to have a baby. As ARP in isolation does not address the underlying social values associated with FGM, the social stigma of not undergoing FGM remains. Girls, families, mothers, and grandmothers carry on to be pressured to undergo the practice. Thus, while some components of ARP are quite laudable, particularly the educational programs, they can be effective in changing the attitudes, the risk of exclusion. The perceived loss of cultural identity can limit the success of ARP. In conclusion, for ARP to be effective, especially in dealing with the issue of stigma, as the Kenyan man told me, it needs a collective approach to uplift the girls, and it needs education to fight. People have various reasonings for abandoning FGM or carrying on with FGM, and their ability to do so is highly influenced by social, cultural factors. Because of these variations, a sudden one single intervention program is unlikely to lead to the sudden abandonment of FGM. It must be implemented in combination with other approaches. But I do believe in hope. I do believe in change. I do believe change is possible. Otherwise, we would not be here. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think Lois has frozen. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Lois, are you here? I think you blanked out. Your screen disappeared a little bit. Can't hear you. Wait.
There we go.
Lois,
There you are.
Yeah, it's very much a part of the Zoom issue. We have a
Yeah.
few minutes now. Lorraine, did you have anything more you wanted to say? Because you were really brilliant. I feel that you approached FGM in your unique way of enlightening the viewers and the attendees at our panel. I okay. Did you have anything?
As everyone here, I'm aware of this terrible complexity of FGM. It's just, it is not an easy subject on every level. And there are multiple approaches that people are taking. I think it goes back to my main issue. You can use ARP, but it has to be in combination with several approaches. But I'm aware, painfully aware of the difficulty of this subject. And Lois, I think you're having problems with your Zoom. You have frozen again, but I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
And this is a great time for attendees to put their questions in the chat.
I'm looking at the question. Okay. Okay. I do have a question for Hillary. Hillary, can you hear me?
I can carry on.
Hillary, I thought your issue about FGM and water, which I have never ever thought about, I thought that was a very interesting aspect, and maybe that's another way as a tool to fight FGM. You mentioned that in certain areas where water is in abundance, FGM rates seem to be lower. Did I get that wrong?
Yeah, it was quite a small study, but I
Oh,
mean, a
small
very
study.
significant. It was just in one location in the Rift Valley. But I mean, the difference between 3 that don't do it and they're near water and 60 that do it and are not near water, I think definitely requires a great deal more investigation. The whole thing about water is, I probably sounded a bit like a geography teacher. There's no harm in being a geography teacher, but actually I was trying to find evidence for things that influence the status of women and the factors that might, other than paternal grandmothers, influence the decision to do it or not. It was quite complicated, which is why I referred people to those 2 papers I'd already published, because there I have links to some of this stuff. It took quite a lot of time, but I feel that it really is time, as you say now, to say, well, we're doing all the things we can on the ground. What are we missing? And the answer is, what are we missing is that the men are not recognizing that they can do things that change the structure of society in a positive way for everyone. If that answers your question, Lorraine.
Very much. And I have one question to Dr. Levin. Can you hear me, Toby? Toby, there's no sound.
I can hear you.
Yes. Just a quick question. This is maybe perhaps on a personal level. In one of your slides, you showed the photo of she wrote Cutting the Rose.
Yeah, Effa
Yes, and I've said this so many times. It is probably one of the greatest regrets in my life that I never met her because she was a little bit before my time. But what instilled me to fight FGM is when I read her book, Cutting the Rose. It's a slim volume and a very easy read. And I remember thinking, who is this woman? Apparently, she was quite involved in FGM, worked on it even in the last week when she was dying. In respect, in honor of her, I really wish I had met her. So it was nice that you talked about her. And I do remember in one conference you said, I think of her almost every day. So in honor of this brave, beautiful, beautiful woman who was just taken too soon.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you.
Could you please put in the chat Efluadorcano and the name of that book?
So it's wonderful.
Thank
you.
Cutting the Rose.
Yeah.
We have a raised hand from Lester Liniti. Would you like to tell us your question, please?
You can unmute yourself, Lester, for your question.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to comment on what Lauren was actually talking about, the ARP.
Yeah.
The holistic approach, which actually talk of the community that I come from. I come from Kenya. That is Lester from Kenya, FGM CBO, and I work in Kenya, whereby we have been actually using the alternative rite of passage that Lauren has been talking about. And actually, It is something that need a very community holistic approach, whereby we talk with the youth, we bring the youth on board, we bring the men on board, because we believe the men are actually the one holding the law in the society, the one in taking all the authorities in the community are held by the old men. And the young men also play a very important role, because these are the people who are in later, they'll get married to the girls who actually undergone the alternative rite of passage. And if these people are not brought on board, they'll be actually a resistance from them that saying that I will not marry this girl because this girl has not been cut. And according to my community used to cut girls. So it is because it is something that we're imposing, we are trying to bring the community in a way that everybody will be on board is a very important thing that to approach. The women actually who actually take themselves as the one in my community where the women, when you are fighting about FGM, they say we are being intimidated. I'm not going to grow to be a big woman because I've not undergone the cut. So we bring them on board so that will make that the whole community is involved, because they believe they will be underrated because they are not circumcised, they are not cut, and they will be also believe that they remain children forever because they have never undergone that is a rite of passage. So bringing the ARP as an alternative is something that is very important to our community, although it's not 100% sure. It needs, because sometimes when you don't bring these people on board, you only, some of the organizations actually went up and they only take their girls for the alternative rite of passage without involving their parents. When that girl come back home and their parents are not involved, then their parents will take the role, they are the one in power, the one who take the authorities of the girl, and the girls yet still undergoing the control. In some communities whereby we are able to involve the entire community, at least the rate of taking those girls back to circumcision or back to cutting again, at least is a bit better than comparing to the one only just train the girls and leave the rest of the community. I also like to...
Thank you very much. Lester, that was very important, what you told us in Kenya. I would like to talk one more minute about water. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom will have their U.S. Congress at the end of May this year, and the theme is water. And we have done extensive research on issues of water and human rights. And this is an important connection. I would really welcome one of you to just do a one-pager on water and FGM, and I will publish it all over the world. Yeah. I mean, I think this is important. One other point, too, is that the cutters, the women who are doing the cutting, have a quite powerful political presence. And so when you are trying to stop a cultural practice that is a source of income for some of the people, then there's again this tension that arises. So we are almost, Sarah, we almost at the end of our webinar.
Yeah. Lois, I can give you that because I've written most of it already. I'll send you something.
Okay, and that would be very helpful. I think I learned a lot from this, and I've worked on FGM for years. And so I really think that this is a panel that needs to continue. But in closing, and then we can have informal talk if there's more time, I'm going to read you an FGM poem from Somalia. Now, I'm speaking to you today from the Midwest of US, from Minnesota, where we have the largest Somali population outside of Somalia. And so the fact of that resonates here too with cases being documented of FGM. Okay, Birth of a baby must be a blessed event, but mine was nothing short of a curse. Daddy's face didn't shine. Drums didn't make noise. No shots were fired. No ceremony was held. The newborn was me, and I am a girl. In my culture, gender counts most. A girl is not as welcome as a baby boy. Raising camel in the rangeland is family's highest priority. They believe a girl has no hands for that. Harsh combat against the enemies is a family's highest priority, but they believe a girl has no heart for that. Reconciliation in the aftermath of a clash is a family's priority. What we're talking about here is conflict. They believe a girl has no head for that. At 5, I had to face the worst. A knife cut across my genitals. A midwife circumcised me, stitched me, infibulated me. Where I used to have a clit, I have a black scar now. Why inflict me with this pain? This real pain of primitive cultures. In tears I am at every stage of my life. Mom and Dad, am I not a daughter? Dear brother, am I not a sister? Dear mankind, I should say womankind, wherever you are, am I not a human being? Tears, tears. That was from Abdi Nur Mohammed, a poet in Somalia. So, Sarah, how we are doing on the timing?
Yes, we're right at time. We could go a couple more minutes.
Great, great. Do any of our attendees have any additional questions or comments? Just raise your hand.
I would like, I think he's gone. I hope he's not Lester Lentiti. I can't pronounce his name. The man that was talking about ARP. What I've noticed in the past, I would say 2-3 years, more and more men are becoming involved. And this is a very good thing. It used to be an all female, but now we've got more men talking about it. And I think this is a positive sign that we have made progress. So for those men out there who are watching and listening, or as I was told a fortnight ago, when a man looked at me and he said, "My little girl is not cut and she will never be cut." I hope these men carry this torch in our fight to eradicate FGM. So thank you, gentlemen. This is most appreciated.
Thank you, Lorraine, for that explanation. There is a program called Call for Men, Call
Yes.
to Men. And maybe we could talk to their director about including some segment of FGM in their publications and their webinars. I see we have a comment also from Jen.
Oh yeah, Samuel. Yeah.
Let's try to bring that up. Jen, you're present today? I think I know you from Will and from other programs. You were an advocate, I believe, on Cuba. But she has a question for Lorraine. I have it on the screen. I don't know if you can see it. Given the increasingly younger ages of girls impacted by ARP and FGM, is this trend related to greater fundamentalism globally or in religion and culture and law?
Everyone, I think, I hope everyone can join me in on this question. They have noticed the trend of girls becoming younger and younger. They're not exactly sure why this is happening. Bluntly put, is it easier to hold a child down? Is it easier to hide? Okay. The fact that in most African countries, there is a law against FGM. It has not mainly perhaps been pushed, but there is a law. And so to hide it, it may be easier. Whether or not it's related to religion, I don't know. Does anyone have any feelings on that? I personally think it's just easier to hide and easier to control. And the girls' external genitals are smaller. Maybe it's easier for the cut.
Toby?
Hillary,
No, go ahead, please.
And when they're little,
Hillary,
they can't tell anybody.
there you go.
Yeah,
So
you go.
there's no teachers who are going to say, what happened to you this holiday then?
right. Yeah, I was just going to say something like that. They can't tell anyone. And above all, they are too young to accuse their parents and bring them to court. It was in France, once the cut woman turned 18, that she went to law and brought among one of the first cases to Linda.
She did.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
went to the police and
Right.
told them because she was afraid that her little sister was going to be mutilated.
Right.
Right.
A big case, big case, yeah.
Right. And also
Yeah.
the much younger children forget also, you know. So they don't know. A young woman came and watched videos in my living room for 2 weeks, telling me afterwards, she was from Eritrea, and this is in Germany. She was telling me she had the feeling that something had happened to her. No one had told her. She wanted to learn about this subject because she was driven by some unconscious impulse. And at the end of the 2 weeks, she said, now I know, right, that she was cut. And it had happened when she was 2 years old.
And that happened to two or three of the women that I interviewed at a distance for my book. They just didn't know it had happened until they were 20, something like that. And we do have to add, of course, that there are a lot more women globally now, that young women than were. So the incidence is going to go up unless we, in terms of absolute numbers, unless we really attack the reasons that it happens, because there's more young women.
Right.
We know that FGM does occur in refugee camps, and one of the reasons that there is this pressure to have this patriarchal observance is that they have to marry the girls off early because they're so poor, because they don't want the shame if girls get involved earlier, and so that's another negative trend. And during COVID, the rate of FGM went up, child marriage went up, violence against women. So there are a number of intersecting issues that affect FGM and its eradication. Any more comments? I hope sometime we'll have a chance, Toby, to hear more about what Dr. Foldis does on his reconstruction, because that's a really important knowledge to have. Do you want to quickly tell us just a minute?
Did you ask me to mention something?
Would you please, on Dr. Foldis, Pierre Foldis, you published his book and what he's done.
And I just saw him recently. I'm trying to bring up the figures from our last discussion. I was surprised that he operates so very frequently, hundreds of women a year, and has opened a total of 15 clinics in France, throughout France, which means that there's that much demand for his services. There is a movement in the similar direction in Germany as well, which has been covered broadly in the German press, although there is controversy as well, because women have not always received the result that they expected. On the other hand, I personally know people who are thrilled. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I'll call. That was my daughter. They have not been at all satisfied with the results, but on the whole, yes, it has given a remarkable ego boost to women. I've attended some of his speak outs, that is to say, Foldes speak outs in Paris, where the point is, for 20 or so of his satisfied patients, basically satisfied patients, to discuss the ways in which their lives have been altered and improved. And the most significant one to me was a young woman who had talked about her introversion and fear of public speaking, which I know is something that affects people who have, from all walks of life. But she said that the restoration of her wholeness, of her physical integrity, gave her the confidence to actually become a different extroverted person with leadership qualities. This is amazing news, really. And in other instances, of course, one woman who was preparing to have the operation chose not to because her boyfriend said, "You're fine as you are. I love you as you are. You don't have to go through this additional pain." And Foldes does talk about awareness that post-traumatic stress disorder flashbacks and this kind of thing can arise, just the context. And so, of course, he addresses this and attempts to do something about it. In a sense, he's very Freudian too, because the talking points are bringing the patient to talk about her desires and her loss is as much a part of the whole process as the physical restoration. And
Thank you, Toby. That's very, very important information. We are having this panel at the time of the UN Commission on the Status of Women in New York. It's the largest women's convention in the world. It is hybrid. And so what you're presenting here today really is going all around the world. And because we will be recording it, we can make it available on a continuing basis. The themes of CSW, the priority theme is poverty. And I'd like to say that what we've talked about at intersectionalities, marrying girls off early, not having enough food in the family to feed this extra girl. This is an issue of poverty, possibly saying it's an accelerator of FGM. There are, again, many of the sustainable development goals that have dimensions that affect FGM. So another goal we would have is to enforce the laws. When there are laws, as you mentioned, all over Africa, they have to be enforced, or they're just pieces of paper. And women recognize this in a lot of our human issues. Okay, anybody want to make a closing statement?
I just looked at someone's chat that they sent to Hillary about this water. I think it was from Lester. And it's a very interesting chat where he says, you have a chance to talk about FGM issues by using this water project with men. Very, very interesting. Extremely interesting.
I've asked him to send me more information so I can put it in the piece.
Yeah. I do believe in hope. I do believe in change. This is why we're here, and it will happen. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing comments, Hillary and Toby?
Yeah, I just go on, Toby, you first, then I.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, I've had it on my mind for quite some time, an aspect of the subject very rarely discussed and, to my mind, hardly well studied. It's the vast mythology, which has a spiritual aspect to it that is associated with FGM. And I believe that belief itself is an issue we need to address, because belief is stronger than reason. and
Mhm.
the need for an affection for something which is, I'm going to call it cultural, traditional. I believe also with Lois that it's torture. Nonetheless, plays an anchoring role in the longevity of this issue. And it would be very nice if we could examine, for instance, the stories and myths and symbols with which people grow up who are subjected to FGM.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. And Hillary?
Yeah. Everything that's been said today obviously makes a great deal of sense, and people are working really hard to try and stop it. Not enough of us and not enough resources to do it, but many of us working in all our different ways really hard. I mean, what I've tried myself to do, because I watch, and I've been watching now, as you know, for many years, we still haven't quite got there, which is what led me to think, well, what are the contexts that we're ignoring or that we're not aware of rather than that we're actively in? And the answer is, this is a difficult issue for many men. And I know there are men here who would say, I deal with it well, and congratulations for that. I mean, sincerely. But we have to find ways of making men understand, because they're the policymakers, they are on the whole the politicians who decide what happens to us all. They have to understand that they can do things that will actively stop FGM, because it shifts the whole dialogue about who is adult, who isn't, who's got status, who hasn't, who's independent, who isn't. It shifts the whole dialogue in a way that people can then say, we don't need this. And that is a job for men, because we can't, as women, do it on our own. There aren't enough of us in that sphere.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lorraine, I first met you at a panel in Geneva. And
Right, at the human rights.
presented about FGM in Iran.
Kamal Ahmadi, yes.
Yes. And
Camille
it
Ahmadi.
was very interesting because we are not able to go to Iran and talk with the women easily. But he was also criticized for publishing this, and yet it was really a breakthrough.
Mhm.
Well, I guess we have, Sarah, are we on the end of our Zoom?
I think we're over.
Yes, we're a bit over.
Sarah, thank you very much. I appreciate the help you gave and your patience when we got a little flippy this morning and thought the computer wasn't working. Thank you
I
very
think
much.
you're all
No problem.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will eradicate FGM in our lifetimes, ladies.
I hope so. My
Oh,
goodness.
please. Hope I see everyone in June. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.